Would you all please sign in? Ms. Hawley?
All councilors present, with Councilor Vigil previously requesting to be excused, and a quorum has been declared.
Thank you. We've got agenda approval next. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Yes, Mayor, we do have the removal of one item, which was the appointment to the tree board. We are still in the middle of a hiring process there, and so that item has been delayed until that process is complete.
Thank you, Heather. Charlie?
And with that, I'll make the motion that we approve the agenda as amended and excuse Councilor Vigil.
I second.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, start voting, please. Ms. Hawley?
The motion carried unanimously.
We'll move on to citizen comment. Alamosa City Council welcomes your comments. Citizens wishing to speak may obtain and complete a speaker card through the City Clerk at the start of the meeting. I've got one card. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to fill one out? Wade and Amy Price. Please step to the podium, identify yourselves and your address if you wish.
Hi, I'm Amy Price, and I live at 8544 County Road 4 South here in Alamosa. We do have some property within the city that we own, though, at 1155 7th Street.
And I'm Wade Price, and all this as above. We're here because of the possible zoning changes. We're asking the City Council to consider changing the zoning code for an RV park to be allowed by permitted use in commercial business zones, where it is currently now only allowed in agricultural zones. We believe that by allowing an RV park within the city limits, it would beautify larger vacant lots, bring in more tax revenue, bring outside dollars to downtown locally owned businesses and restaurants, as well as give different options for extended lodging. We appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Sit down.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Heather, do we have any follow-up on that?
No, sir.
Actually, the only follow-up I would have is just to comment that there will be a public hearing on the amendments to the zoning ordinance on December 6th, I think, is that meeting date. So you are certainly welcome to come and speak at the public hearing where record is made of comments that are made.
Thank you, Eric. We'll now move on to consent calendar A. The consent calendar allows multiple actions with one motion. Consent calendar A contains routine items which have been recommended for action by staff or advisory boards. Council may remove a consent calendar item for separate consideration. Tonight we have 4 items. We've got the approval of the minutes of the special meeting for October 11th, 2017. Approval of the minutes of the meeting of October 18th, 2017. The September 2017 monthly financial reports and monthly expenditure report. We have the approval of the September 2017 monthly expenditure report. Councilor Griego.
If there's no questions, I'll make the motion we approve consent calendar A.
I second.
I've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on consent calendar A? Start voting, please. Ms. Hawley?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. I accidentally hit that. Thank you. Regular business brought forward by city staff. Tonight we have a first reading on ordinance number 33-2017 by Public Works. Pat? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will just do a very brief introduction. Otherwise, I'll
say everything that Todd is getting ready to say right behind me. This is the first reading for our new Unified Development Code that we have been working on for over a year. We did a lot of public outreach. We've accepted a lot of public comment and opinion. We had a committee made up of City Council, made up of Planning Commission members and staff, working on this. We've spent many hours going through land use tables and discussing different things and different ideas and different concepts. And with that, I will turn it over to Todd. This is Todd Messenger. He's the attorney that has been helping us with this. He's a land use attorney from Denver. He's worked tirelessly to provide us a code that fits our community. He's very good at asking questions that we don't know answers to, and he's been just a joy to work with. So that being said, here is Todd.
Thanks, Matt.
Welcome, Todd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Todd Messenger, 1801 California Street, Suite 2600, Denver, for the record. We're delighted to be here on first reading of the new Unified Development Code for the city of Alamosa. And, you know, in terms of short history, the city hired RPI Consulting to do a comprehensive plan, downtown needs assessment, and code assessment and correction project back in November 2015. At the time, Gabe Preston, who runs RPI, had a coder on staff, and he was going to do this all by himself. And then his coder took a different job, and that was a big loss for Gabe. And we are delighted that he was able to fall back on us and that the city approved our participation in this project. So we were subcontracted to start this project in August of 2016. And in October, we presented a strategic assessment to the City Council saying, here's what your plan says, here's what your code says, here are some recommendations for how we can make some changes to all of this to make all of it make more sense and to make it implement your plans in a way that your current code doesn't. We had committee meetings on issues that were raised in the strategic assessment and also issues as we saw them, things that we needed to address in a code to make it work out for the city from November 2016 to March 2017. We presented at a joint workshop of the City Council and the Planning Commission on August 30th, and now we're at first reading tonight. There will be some opportunities for minor changes between first and second, and staff continues to go through the code to make sure that there are no errors or internal inconsistencies or any other issues in there that we need to address. So what we expect is in about a month when we come in for second reading, we'll have any tweaks that need to be done will be presented. So the strategic assessment really set out what we wanted to do. It's what are we going to achieve with this code project in the broadest sense so that we have a good transition between the policies of the comprehensive plan and how do we turn those into numbers and tables and text in a code. So we made 11 recommendations for comprehensive plan implementation and 4 substantive matters that need to be in the code, and then 8 recommendations just for making the code better. So we can have the policies in the plan implemented in a variety of ways. Our approach is, as Albert Einstein once put it, keep things as simple as possible, but not simpler. And so those other 8 go to those issues. So what we recommended was to use an approach that we call the community character approach. So instead of just saying in the R1 zone, you have a 12,000-foot lot, you say in the R1 zone, we expect a certain type of character that we would get with the 12,000-foot lot, but there's a couple of other ways to do it too, like 2 6,000-square-foot lots and some open space. So we created an approach where you provide a certain amount of space and you have a housing palette to work from. So if you're going to do a new neighborhood, you can do whatever kind of housing you think will meet the market, and you can get that approved a lot faster than if you were doing something creative and going through negotiations at the dais to get it done. And then we added landscaping standards. One of the big holes in your current code is it doesn't have any standards for landscaping, and you've got some really good actors in the environment that are doing some nice landscaping along streets in particular, and you've got some others that have just complied with the code and their sites are rather barren. And for stormwater runoff, the city's accepting a lot of stormwater that it maybe shouldn't have to, and so we think the landscaping standards will help not only upgrade the character of those areas that are developing, but also to prevent degradation of the city's stormwater system that the taxpayers have to handle. We created a CBD zone, or a central business district zone, to apply to downtown, because currently downtown doesn't have zoning that's all that different from the highway commercial areas in town. And we wanted to create a special zone to create that, or to protect that special character that you have downtown. Currently there's like a design overlay, but it doesn't come together very well, and we thought a freestanding zone would be a good idea. We wanted to create another zone for established neighborhoods that gave people an opportunity to sort of build onto or have some more flexibility with their homes, so to encourage reinvestment. And we implemented that as the EN, or established neighborhood zone. We wanted a new zone for campuses, not just for the university, but for healthcare campuses or childcare campuses or any other kind of campus-like environment. So now we could do master plan campuses, which is kind of like a planned unit development, but a little bit easier to jump through those hoops. We wanted to create at the beginning a transitional zone, which would have been for residential buildings that are along corridors that aren't really good for residential use anymore. And on reflection, we decided a mixed-use zone would be better. It can accommodate that, but it could also accommodate new development in the northwestern portion of the town, where you might want to have a variety of different uses go in. So we created a broader district. We want to update the land use table. The current land use table in your existing code kind of micromanages a little bit. It has some obsolete uses in it. And we tried to modernize and consolidate land uses so that we knew what would be allowed where, and that we could anticipate uses coming into the market that aren't there that could be picked up by one of the categories and allowed. Providing standards for evaluating uses that aren't listed, so in case we don't pick it up within one of our definitions, we can compare something that somebody proposes to what's there and then allow it administratively without having to come in with a code amendment. It's a lot nicer to say yes to something you should say yes to than say, no, the code won't let us do it. And so we have a way to allow some creativity in the marketplace. Wanted to reallocate the land uses in the land use table to make sure that when we have a zone that's supposed to do something, that the land uses are, are allowed there. We had to reallocate it anyway, because once we decided all the new land uses, when we added a couple of new zoning districts, we had to decide what uses would be allowed in those zoning districts. Revise and recalibrate the parking standards. Some of your parking standards were really over parking the spaces. And so when you consider the character of the community as a balance between your parking fields and your buildings and your landscaping, if you don't need a huge parking field, you shouldn't require one. So we sort of recalibrated and brought those in line with industry standards. We wanted to improve the non-residential landscape standards, and we did that. We have some buffering standards now between more intensive uses and less intensive uses. We wanted to create standards for fences. There was a discussion of how, in one case the fence was a couple of old Buicks. Now we have fences that are actually made of fence material, would be a requirement. So it's not too onerous, but it has to kind of look like a fence to be a fence. We wanted to create a unified development code, which means that your subdivision code, your sign code, your annexation code, and your zoning code are all in the same place. All those standards are interrelated anyway, and a lot of the new development that comes into Alamosa comes in as small annexations, and so all that is in one place. We wanted to reorganize for intuitive access, and we'll show you what the organization is. I'll fly through that because I don't want to bore you with it. But we have our preliminaries where they go, and then what can I do with my land? How much can I do with my land? How does it have to be designed? What process do I have to go through? How is it enforced, and what do the words mean? It's sort of the flow through it, so we're not mixing all those things together throughout. And we wanted to standardize the review process, so we didn't have a bunch of different ways to get approval for all different things. A lot of times we need more than one approval to get something done, and we want to know what process that is, and we only want to have to look at one reference point for that. So to the extent that the law would allow, we have a standardized process for reviewing things. Within that, we also wanted to make sure that the staff was driving the decision-making as much as possible, and in order to delegate decision-making to staff, you have to have appropriate standards in place that would be like the council would decide if it were in front of the council. And so we tried to create standards to make sure that there's a certain quality of development, and then if those standards are met, then staff could make the approval. And so you'll see a lot of what we call limited use approvals in the code and the land use tables. And that means staff approves it, and there's a standard specific to that use that staff has to check and make sure is met, and if it's met, then it goes forward. We wanted to reduce the time between application and approval, and the most important part of that is if staff is making the decision, then you don't need another month or two to get it through a public hearing. And one of my favorite jokes is actually from Seinfeld, where he says, you know, more people are afraid of public speaking than death. And so at any given funeral, you know, more people would rather be in the casket than delivering the eulogy. And that really, I take that to heart because, you know, we're asking local businesses or local homeowners to come in front of a council or a planning commission or a board of adjustment, or in some cases all three, just to do something that we should let them do anyway. And so that's why when we drive it to staff level, people are a lot more comfortable coming to the counter and saying, can I do this? Yes, okay, I'll go do that. And so we promote people to reinvest when they have those opportunities without having to go do something that they fear more than death. We wanted to revise the land dedication and fee and lieu provisions instead of just dedicating 8%. You know, we look at the bigger picture. We prevent the mandatory dedication of small leftover tracts that increase the city's costs. And we look at it more strategically and say, if you're going to come in and build 100 lots, but you only want to do 3 now, let's find out where your park's going to be now. And so we've set it up that way. We wanted to calibrate approvals to the duration and pace, or approval durations to the pace of growth, so that approvals lasted long enough that people could actually use them, and to meet markets that come in potentially slowly. And we have our vested rights process to extend the period that a development approval can be valid. And then update the sign regulations. Back in 2015, the United States Supreme Court decided a case called Reed versus Gilbert. And in that case, the court said that if your sign regulation on its face, in the text of it, addresses the content of the sign, then it's presumptively unconstitutional, unless you have a compelling governmental interest and it's the absolute least restrictive means of regulating and advancing that compelling governmental interest. Nobody's ever won that case. And so we took all the content-based stuff out of your code. Your code was pretty clean as it was, so it wasn't that hard to do. But now we are confident that you have a code that complies with the U.S. Supreme Court mandate in Reed versus Gilbert. So in terms of the organization of the thing, I'm not going to go through every section, but I just wanted to show you, as you are looking through this code, I'm going to roadmap it for you real quick. The first part of it is Article 1, the title, purpose, authority, applicability, jurisdiction, all this stuff that you may read once. But it is the preliminaries that sort of introduces the code and what it's all about. And it helps you with the transition into the new code. It explains how those things relate together. Article 2 is zones and land use. So it sets out all the different zoning districts and says what's allowed where. This is really the heart of the code. This is the what can I do with my land piece. And we've set it up with tables so that, and I think your current code has this too, which is a good thing. If you have a product that's looking for a home, you look at the product and you go across and figure out which zoning district is allowed in. If you have land that's looking for a product, you look in the column and you figure out what's allowed. And so it's very user-friendly in that respect. We have in Division 2-3, the limited and conditional use standards. These are the limited use standards are the use-specific standards that staff will apply when somebody comes in, when you see an L in the table. And so that's all there. Some standards for temporary uses. Then we get into Article 3. If you're going to build a new project, the density, intensity, open space, landscape surface, and scale, these are all the things that have to do with how much can I build on this vacant piece of property. Then we get into Article 4, which is the lot building and structure standards. This is where we get into the housing palette. So if I want to build a house on this lot, what are the height and setback standards for that? That's all in here. And I can build a house, I could build a duplex, a townhouse, a multiplex, a multifamily, manufactured home, tiny homes, cottages, the whole thing. About any housing type you can think of, we've anticipated and we've built into these tables. We've got the same types of standards for non-residential and mixed-use lots. And then we get into things like exceptions from setbacks and then supplemental standards, which are your fences and your outdoor storage and your accessory dwelling units and all of that. And then wireless telecommunications, there's been some recent advances in federal law. We built all that stuff into here. So all of the procedural things that the feds make us do are in your code, and all of the substantive things are built into here. Your sign code is in Division 4.7. Design standards, you have your large-scale retail standards now, your downtown design standards, manufactured home park and manufactured home subdivision design standards. We built all those things in. Only a few changes in terms of downtown to consolidate and make it work. Site design standards, if you're going to build a new subdivision, these things would be in your subdivision code now, but since we don't necessarily subdivide when we design a site, it's all consolidated and unified. These are your circulation, snow storage, streets and pedestrian way design, things like that. Parking standards in 5.2. We've got ways now of doing credits for on-street parking and sharing parking between, if you have a church and a bar next to each other and they want to share a parking lot, they shouldn't require any more parking spaces, right? Because you use one at night, the night before, and you just stay there, and the next day you drive home after you repent. Then we get into landscape standards. So we have all the different standards for landscaping in 5.3, lighting standards, grading, erosion sediment control. And then we get into your public improvements and site improvements and things that are generally in a subdivision code, but could also be applicable to developments that aren't subdivisions. Again, stormwater maintenance easements and utilities and public improvements. We also have in Division 6.4, which I should have pulled to the left a little bit, operations plan. So if you build a use that has a ton of truck traffic, now the city's going to say, well, where do the trucks go? How do we make sure that they're not going across residential streets, or how do we make sure that they're safely circulating around the city? We would ask for a heavy truck routing plan in those cases. Article 7 deals with when the circumstance that somebody's already got something on the ground and it doesn't comply with the new code. How do we deal with that? That's all in Article 7, and it's very generous to make sure that existing uses are allowed to continue, existing buildings are allowed to continue, and reinvestment is promoted. Then Article 8 is all the administrative stuff. We start by laying out who makes what decisions. Then we have a list of all the different approvals and permits that are required so that you have a point of reference in Section 21.8.201. And 21.8.202 and 28.1.8.203. And then plan unit development and campus master plans are laid out in Division 8.3. 8.4 is annexation. 8.5 is your standard process. So anything that can go through the standard process pipeline does. And that's just, you're not allowed to talk about it once you've filed it. You have your pre-application meeting, you have your application, and you go through a completeness and sufficient review until you get to the very end of this, where you've got an approval or a denial. And then in 21.8.521, there are special procedures for wireless telecom. These are dictated by the feds. We can't really control them, but we're not going to hold all development to those same standards, so we just make an exception for that in 521. Vested rights is in 8.6. That's important for these long build-out types of projects. Modifications, variances, appeals are in 8.7. And then how do we enforce the code? All that is in Article 9. And then in Article 10, we put in all the findings and objectives and intent, all these things that you would need if you get sued and you need to explain yourself. We didn't put that up front because it gets a little detailed. But whenever you're dealing with the First Amendment, you need to have stuff in there that deals with that. So findings about sign regulation, if you ever get into it about a marijuana use, we have disclaimers about marijuana uses in there. We've got our findings about wireless telecom, where we can't violate federal law in terms of dealing with electromagnetic regulation, or radiation and so forth. And then in Article 9, how do you measure all this stuff? How do you make the calculations of density and whatnot? All that stuff is in 11.1. And then in 11.2, we have a table of acronyms, which I think is helpful. Planners love acronyms, but generally everyone else hates them. They're all in the table in 202. And then all the definitions, what do the words mean, is in 203. That's the structure of the code. If you have any questions about how all this comes together, happy to answer them. But I think that gives you a roadmap to look through it.
Thank you, Todd. I did have a question back, I can't remember what section it was. You had the Board of Planning Commission and the Board of Adjustments? No, Planning Commission. Where's your Planning Commission? There it is, and you've got back one.
Right there.
And Zoning Board of Adjustments. They're both one, aren't they? They are here in Alamosa.
Yeah, but they have different roles. So when you put on your other hat, then that's the other role.
Okay.
And it is up to council. If council wanted to change that, they could. And then you would have a section that you can make that change in. One of the things that I like to do when I write a code is make sure that it's really durable. So you can make all kinds of changes over time, but if you can plug and play those changes, then it doesn't fall apart as fast. And so I wanted to give you something that would last at least a decade in terms of its overall form, so that all the energy that you were putting into it in terms of volunteer hours and whatever and review and reading, that wouldn't go to waste in 5 years because of amendments. So now you can amend away and it's not going to fall apart.
It's nice to have that option. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Councilor Daniel?
Thank you. Todd, thank you so much. It's nice to see you in person instead of on the computer screen. I wanted to say a couple of things is that this can be a really kind of dry and intense process, and I really appreciate your ability to break it down for normal people. And I think you do that very well, and you made sure we understood what you were doing. I did have a question. Some things came up today for me when I was at the tree board, and they had some questions about the landscaping standards and just kind of where those came from, like it, you know, others communities our size or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then I did wonder if you had any thoughts on the RV park comment that was made.
I have no objection. I think it's, you know, in terms of the planning policy behind it, legally not a problem, right? Planning policy wise, as long as it's not in CBD, you know, if you're going to put it in a business zone, that's going to bring people here that'll stay here a while. And I think that's good. You know, the economics of tourism are important in Alamosa, and if you can have more ways for people to stay here instead of somewhere else, I think that's a good idea in terms of policy. You know, whether you want to attach any kind of other additional standards to it or whatever, that could be a point of discussion. But conceptually having an RV park in Alamosa means people are going to be buying dinner, people are going to be buying, you know, and the longer people stay, the more they're going to like it. This is a cool city. And so if somebody comes and then they say, you know, I'd like to retire here, or I'd like to open a business here, or something like that, you want to invite people in to stay a while.
Councillor Coleman?
And was there the part on the tree board question too?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if that got answered.
Oh, sorry about that.
Where
did they come
the
from?
landscaping standards came from, they have some recommendations, and I want to just make sure we can.
Sure. I've actually used a kind of a strategic template, if you will, since about 2006 for landscaping regulations. So basically every code that I've done has it's not really boilerplate because I customize it for every community, but the ideas and the concepts that are in there, you'll find that stuff in Durango. Durango's a whole lot more detailed than you need to be, and they require a whole lot more trees than we're asking in Alamosa. Zachary, Louisiana, Valparaiso, Indiana, Centennial has some of that, Centennial, Colorado. Those are some pretty good starting points, and you could ask any of those planning directors how that's working out.
And Todd, when you talk about that you customize that, I think you take a look at kind of what the vibe is in the community, what if they want a lot of landscaping and a lot of requirements there versus we're going from nothing to something, and so getting a feel for the community on that spectrum of where they're going to fall. Is that kind of what you meant when you're customizing it?
Oh, absolutely. So strategically, the idea is maximize the ability for somebody to be creative. I'm not a very good designer, so I don't want to tell people how to design their project. I just want to say, hey, here's the palette of stuff you need to use. You go do it. And in that capacity, that's how that comes together. But, you know, compared to like a Durango, where they say we want trees everywhere, you know, we want an urban forest, you know, we just wanted to introduce the concept of having, you know, parking lot landscaping and buffer yards. And so it's a lot scaled back. You know, there's much more of a sort of property rights vibe, but also we don't want to create high barriers to entry by saying, you know, you can't open your business until you plant $5,000 worth of landscaping. That $5,000 may be the difference between a business that works and a business that doesn't. And we're really sensitive to those additional costs.
And, you know, further on that point, I'm sure that we will take information and input from the tree board, and I'm sure that Todd and Gabe would be happy to take a look at that and tell us whether that's realistic in their experience or not.
I have asked them to go ahead and get their feedback ready prior to the first reading, so that way we can look at it ahead of time, because I think that is only more than fair. And so to see if it is beyond the scope of, because I do think there's a vibe in Alamosa where we want to grow our trees and our landscaping, but we don't need to be Durango with an urban forest, you know. And so I think that I did ask them to get some things ready before the public hearing so we could look at them as staff.
I think that's greatly appreciated. I think with them as an advisory board and the technical knowledge that they have and that role they serve in advising council, at the same time we've got this bigger discussion of all these other things. And so I think having conversations sooner to see if we can get more on the same page before second readings very, very good.
And just finally, too, you have this opportunity now with a code that's got this compartment for landscaping, that you can look to those other codes and see sort of how they scale in and scale out from what you want to do. And you can add things or just, you know, tweak a couple of numbers, and it makes a big difference in the environment. I like to use this program called SketchUp. If you look up SketchUp, one word on the internet, there's a free version, and you can drop in three-dimensional trees on a landscape and scale, and that'll give you an idea what fits. You know, I mean, that's another thing. We can say we need 30 trees per 100 feet, but then we know that they're not going to be healthy. So we try to test stuff too. What kind of visual screen is that going to be, you know, before we say this is what you should do?
Councilor Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor. Todd, I too would like to thank you, Heather, Pat, and staff, and Councilor Daniels, and everyone else who participated in this project. It was really fun and eye-opening when we were going through this process. And it was a good feeling this past couple of weeks, Todd, when I was out in the community talking with people, and to hear some of their feedbacks about some of the things that they would like to see or see our community have, like an RV park, and also the tiny homes, and define where the central business district is, and things like that. I felt confident telling them that we had this unified development code to where we are able now to address those issues of concern. So I really appreciate that. The other thing I like about this code is the streamline process, because now what we've done is we've given the staff the power to move a project forward without having to delay that project, having it to come to council when it fits within certain parameters. So I'm really excited about this, and I would like to thank everyone who participated and helped out a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Obviously, we don't have any other, so it's a first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Daniel.
Mayor, if there are no other comments, I move that we approve on first reading ordinance number 33, 2017, an ordinance repealing and replacing Chapter 1 of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Alamosa and adopting a new Unified Development Code.
A second.
I've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on ordinance number 33-2017? Start voting, please. Ms. Hawley?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you, Council. We'll now move on to resolution number 25-2017, a resolution supporting reauthorization of the lottery by the State of Colorado General Assembly under Parks and Recreation. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Resolution 25 talks about reauthorization of the lottery. A little bit of history on where lottery dollars actually go. Up to 50% of the lottery goes to GOCO, Great Outdoors Colorado. I think we're all familiar with that. They've been a partner, strong partner for us for many years. Up to 40%, GOCO is a competitive grant process, so we're not guaranteed those dollars, but we compete with them. And like I said, they've funded us significantly in the past. 40% of the lottery dollars go to conservation trust funding. This is money all municipalities and counties receive that is earmarked for Parks and Recreation. For example, the city in history has received over $2 million earmarked for Parks and Recreation from conservation trust funds. Finally, the lottery also funds Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I don't know how much history you guys know, but they have been perennially underfunded, and they do a great job. We've partnered with them on, say, our fishing programs, et cetera, et cetera. So this funding is crucial to them as well. I included some examples directly of how they funded us. This is GOCO's funding, over $5 million in Alamosa County in the history of GOCO. Over $900,000 directly to the city of Alamosa. And I mentioned earlier our Conservation Trust funding. How this came about is a partnership of CML, which I know some of you are a part of, and CPRA, Colorado Parks and Recreation Association. So we've partnered to advocate for reauthorization of the lottery. It's a successful program that is the envy of many states across the country. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Thank you, Andy. I know as a member of the policy committee, CML policy committee, unanimously voted to have this go on. So, and I think it's going to go into the executive board. So Liz will be there to vote on this as well. But yeah, this is an essential ingredient in maintaining a lot of the programs and recreational opportunities for everyone in Colorado. Yes, thank you, Andy. Councillor Hensley.
So just to echo, I just had my CML executive board meeting last Friday, and so we will have another one when this goes through as far as for approval and stuff, but it's exciting that we're going to be part of this. There was quite a list of cities that had already put their proclamation through, and it was just timing for where our city council meeting met, so I'm excited that we're part of that. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Stefano.
I don't have a question. I was just saying we should adopt the attached resolution number 25-2017 as presented.
I've got a motion.
I'll second.
I've got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on resolution number 25-2017? Start voting, please. Ms. Hawley?
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy.
You're welcome.
We'll move on to committee reports. Who has a committee report? Councillor Hensley.
I don't have much more to say about CML. We did have our meeting last Friday and just went through a lot of the things that look like we'll go through on legislature and things like that that you obviously had at your meeting. So the big meeting comes up in about a month and a half. Switching over to marketing board. So I've spoken to Councillor Daniels. I have actually been chosen to be on the marketing board as an official member of the marketing board. So I need to give up my city representation so that there's no conflict. And so I am now a voting member of the board. So Chris was or Councillor Daniels, my backup, and so she would like to move into my spot. And so if somebody wants to take the backup position for the marketing board. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Eric, are there any issues here?
Well, there's potential for conflicts of interest as they arise, but that is, excuse me, that exists for any board on which a city council member sits as a voting member. So you just take those as they come.
I guess the question I had was, could she act as a liaison regardless? No? Yes?
Oh, you mean?
Just to report to what's right. Going on the marketing district. Is there a necessity to have a liaison separate from her on that marketing district board?
I don't think there's any legal necessity for that. It's a function of what does council want to do.
And I think it's, you know, and Councillor Hensley can discuss this in regards to what you're comfortable with on being able to separate hats and if there's executive sessions and those types of items as well.
So, this is new ground. I feel very comfortable. This was definitely something I had to consider in the sense of separating hats. So if council wanted me to continue to be the representative, I'm fine, just as long as they're aware of the fact that I would only report things that I knew, you know, that obviously if there's things in executive session, things like that, that I wouldn't be able to report those items, that I have to keep my hats separate.
Certainly, yeah. I think that would be appropriate because generally anything that happens in executive session isn't commented on. And as a liaison, you're basically just a conduit of information, basic information, to kind of let us know what the marketing district is up to. So if it's all right with you, I don't have a problem with that.
So I feel.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I guess the comment I would, if Councilor Daniels wants to take that position, you know, we have two, that would give us two people there at the table. And I don't see a problem with that. And maybe somebody else could be the liaison.
Councilor Daniel?
Thank you. So I was thinking about this, the question. I think it's a valid question, Mayor. Where I went, Liz, is I absolutely think that you have the, or sorry, Councilor, look at us. Goodness, informal today. I absolutely think you have the ability to have both hats separate, but my thought would be is when I'm there and I'm only wearing one and you're only wearing the marketing one, I think it would be easier for you to engage in discussions and me easier to observe the discussions, because that would be my role versus trying to figure out both pieces. And so I'm comfortable either way, because I'm totally comfortable with your ability to separate, but I do enjoy those groups, that group.
So I would agree, and so if you're open to doing it, I think I like keeping the separate hats. They meet on second Thursday. I need to look at my calendar. It's a Thursday and it's in the evening, and I just can't remember if golf board is the second and marketing is the third, so give me 1 sec. I just know I'm busy on Thursdays.
Wait, what day aren't you busy, Councilor?
So marketing board is the second Thursday evening of the month, and it starts at 6 p.m.
So I guess the question that's out there is, Councilor Daniel will move up from the alternate to the lead as a city liaison, and the question that remains is if someone wants to be the alternate.
I'd take the alternate position if that was the case.
Very good. Thank you, Councilor Daniel, and congratulations, Councilor Hensley.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other committee reports? Councilor Daniel.
Thank you. As stated earlier, I did attend the tree board. You heard part of the update was about the city code, so we'll be working on that. But they also are looking at a proposal for an Excel grant. I mentioned this last time. We were looking at a space out by the recycling center. That has changed. So that space will not work. And so they're looking at something maybe near the cemetery. They weren't sure if there were a lot of power lines there. But they're going to check it out. We've received this grant for the past 9 years, so we always write really good applications. The parks staff helps tremendously get this done, and so I think we're going to be able to put a good proposal in and be able to get some trees under power lines, which will be great. I will let you know when they do pick a site. And then another exciting thing happened. We have a potential collaborator for next year's Arbor Week, someone who's interested in doing education in the community about tree health and some really neat information, and they want to start their partnership already so we don't have to at the last minute figure out what we're going to do for Arbor Week. So it's been really, that was an exciting meeting today.
Thank you, Councilor Daniel. Any other committee reports? I met with the Alamosa Housing Authority. They are still discussing going non-smoking. There was an issue specific to possible smoking areas on Housing Authority property. That's yet to be discussed. And so they will probably finish discussing that and come up with a resolution of sorts before the 2018 deadline, which is when they've got to decide whether they're going to allow smoking or non-smoking on their property. The other issue that they have, which is near completion, is the replacement of all doors and windows in many of the units. And so that is coming along well. A lot of folks are happy with the new carpets as well, and so that's basically what they discussed. Councilor Cooper, Mr. Cooper's in the audience, and he's a member of that board. Anyone else? We'll move on to staff announcements.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe the city clerk has a little bit of an update relating to the election timeframes.
So as you know, the election is next Tuesday. So I'll get word from Melanie that night of our results. But those won't be official because we have to wait for the canvass to happen. And that's not going to happen until probably the week of the 20th. So after that canvass comes in, then everything will be official and new councilors can take their seats at the first meeting in December. So that's the timeline we're looking at for when new councilors will take their seat, and we'll do appointments, recognition of retiring, if any, and that's what I have on that. If you are running for council, FCPA filing reports are due Friday.
That's this Friday?
This Friday.
Thank you very much. All right. We will go on to
we still have a few more, Mayor. The chief, if you want to do a few updates, and then we have something after that.
Thank you, Chief.
Evening, Council. Just got a couple updates for you. I'll start with our visitor in town. You all are aware that we've had a bear in town in the last couple days. Last night it was in a tree close to the park. We had Division of Wildlife stationed out there watching its activity during our event that we had in the park. It went well. We had to cordon the area off a little bit because we had a lot of curious citizens that wanted to go take pictures, and unfortunately there were some that were harassing it as well. But as of this afternoon, the bear has moved over to the BMX area, the track back behind the baseball field, so further away from the park. It was still in the tree as of this evening. They're hoping that it will continue to come down at night, go down to the river, and finally decide to leave town. But right now it's not causing any issues with the community, and just deciding where it wants to stay, I guess. So that's the update on the bear. The other topic was what I had mentioned, our event in the park that we had last night, our second annual Fright Fest. Officer Nauer is the one who is responsible for that. She is the main participant. All the officers do help, and along with the Shop a Cop program that we have here through the police department, they put together that program, and they're estimating about 1,500 to 2,000 community members attended that event last night. You know, the goal of that is to provide a safe environment for the kids to come out and enjoy Halloween. And with that, we have at least, she made a little report for me, I counted at least 25 community partners, whether it's businesses, private citizens, 25 partners within that come out, and that includes the medical center, the ambulance, the police department, sheriff's office, law enforcement as a whole. Fire department was out there. The chief brought his staff out, and they were passing out goodies, and you know, everybody loves a firefighter. So, but dentist offices, businesses donated toys and candy. It's a total success. The one that I was impressed, and I didn't realize, ATC had 4 of their clients volunteer to come out and help set up and tear down. So that was awesome. I appreciate that. So that was a great thing that I just read. So we're getting everybody involved with this. So it's all about community safety and the kids, the children within our community.
What's ATC?
It's Christina's, Councilor Daniels' group, Advantage Treatment Center. So it's community corrections, commonly known as. So, but that's the 2 events I had. Anybody have any questions about the event or the bear?
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment. I would like to thank Officer Nauer and the PD and everyone who participated last night. Once again, exactly like you said, it was a complete success to see so many community members out there celebrating in a decent, safe, and fun place for their kids to come out to. So hopefully next year to get even bigger, and we'll have more families participate, because that's one of those events that epitomize the quality of life that we're trying to implement and hear more of in Alamosa. So thank you. And please let her know as well, Chief.
I will, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Heather?
Thank you, Mayor. Pat, if you want to come on up, I think we are next. During the Meet the Candidate Forum, we had a little bit of discussion in regards to our capital improvement plan, where some of the projects are occurring, some things like that. It took a lot of work to pull together the information, and Pat and I just yesterday were able to meet on it, and we wanted to be responsive in answering some of the questions we've been receiving since that meeting. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Pat. I think we're sort of tag teaming, but it's mostly Pat doing the presentation.
So as you know, there was some discussion about potential inequities in the distribution of our capital funds specific to different areas of the city. So what I did is I've gone back 5 years, and we tabulated the dollars that have been spent. I hate to say that, I hate to say this, but I tabulated dollars north side, south side on all of our different projects. I used the railroad tracks as a dividing line for lack of anything better, but we wanted to put this argument to bed. While I was doing this, I learned a lot of things. It was a good exercise for me. I certainly had other things to do, but it was a good exercise for me. First being, our records are not designed to distinguish expenditures in different areas of the city. Many of our projects are done with change orders and contract expansions. If we have savings in one project, I'll redirect a contractor to work on something else to take advantage of that savings. That stuff, while it's not untrackable, it's not obvious in the files. Our records in Public Works are not designed to research total expenditures. It's very easy for us to look at budgeted amounts, but when it comes to looking at the amounts that checks are written for, whether we have savings on a project or project overruns, those numbers are in different departments. It just takes some coordination and some time to pull that stuff together. Another thing that I learned that I was a little embarrassed about, I had absolutely no idea where our ward boundaries were. No idea. Charlie, I did not know that you included the south half of the university and the hospital and all of the neighborhoods to the east. I had no idea. Councilor Daniel, I thought you had the north part of the college. Obviously, you know, I looked at that. This was the first time I'd ever taken a hard look at that map. So that kind of goes to show how much I consider ward boundaries in my recommendations for capital money. And when I do make those recommendations, there's a lot of considerations I take into account, and there's a lot of things that I weigh and I evaluate, and then there are a lot of things that I don't weigh and evaluate. I look at traffic counts. Obviously, the higher the traffic count, the faster the road's going to degrade, the more bang for the buck you get with improvement dollars. If we have 5,000 people driving the street every day, those improvement dollars are spread over more people than if we have a street with 300 cars a day. Safety is an obvious concern. Asphalt condition index and the asphalt life cycle curve. So I consider it an important part of my job to protect the investment of the taxpayer. And if we look at this standard life cycle curve, you can see if I can fix something for $50,000 here or $300,000 7 years later, I'm going to try to fix it when we can pay 50. So that plays as much into my recommendations as anything else. I look at the age and maintenance records of underground improvements before I make recommendation for pipe work, Not only do I have to coordinate it with my recommendations for street work, I have to balance those budgets between the enterprise and the general funds, but I also look at maintenance. If we have a pipe that's failing often, I want to get that replaced. I look at infiltration and inflow. We've all heard about I&I. One of the issues we're facing at the wastewater treatment plant are periodic high flow events that can only be groundwater. So the state has a requirement that when we reach 80% of our maximum permitted hydraulic flow, we have to go into a planning phase for either a plant retool or the construction of a new wastewater plant. So it's important to keep the groundwater out of the sewage collection system. That's pretty obvious consideration. Redundancy of infrastructure. If I have another way around, if I can operate valves in such a way that I can send something around the block, obviously that bad pipe in the middle is not that high a priority for me. And contractor availability. That's always an issue for us. Some of the things that I don't consider are ward boundaries, obviously. It's never played a role in my recommendations. The geographic area, north side, south side, east side, west side, that doesn't play a role. Neither does the demographics of the area. I don't, it was almost offensive for me to hear that. And then we're about to show you some numbers, but keep in mind that these are just major public works capital improvements. They don't include things like in-house maintenance efforts, crack sealing, pothole patching. We were asked last year to begin keeping track of how many potholes we fix. Since January 1, we've fixed 4,087 potholes. We created an app on the laptop that the field crew uses to mark every pothole they fill. 4,087. Pipe cleaning and inspection programs are not included in this. Valve and hydrant exercising not included. Alley and dirt road maintenance not included. Lift station maintenance, concrete replacement program, daily activities of the Parks and Rec Department, none of that's included.
And before we get to the numbers, I want to make sure that Pat's message on some of this was heard in regards to, for lack of a better way to address the questions that we've been receiving, we're going to continue the language of north and south, although I know from a council perspective that is something that council took great pride on moving beyond. But to really kind of close out that discussion, there's not much of a better word. In fact, I know when Pat was talking to me, he's like, where do we even draw the north and south? And we thought, well, maybe most people think of the railroad track. And so there's just, while we don't agree with some of this language, and we know that council had taken great pride in moving forward, in order to provide actual data to compare to see what perceptions are and how that lines up with the actual data, that is the language we've continued, not something that we're trying to backslide into. And so as I put the numbers up that Pat can talk us through, I just wanted to make sure that we are emphasizing that, because I don't want anyone to think that this is a new philosophy that we're adopting from a staff perspective.
Thank you. I had trouble with it just putting the spreadsheets together. I don't like perpetuating it, and I don't think it exists. So hopefully these numbers will prove that. I went back to 2013. You'll see two columns basically of spreadsheets. One includes Parks and Recreation, which I thought was important to include, because if we're talking about a quality of life or a community development efforts, things like that, I think Parks and Rec plays a bigger role than streets. That's just, you know, from a community development perspective, that's that's important.
And
So-
how we base that decision is if we weren't doing Parks and Rec improvements in one part of town, you would be hearing about it. So that's why there's one look at it that includes it and one that does not, because we do think it's very relevant.
And then we wanted to show you numbers that were just strictly hard infrastructure improvements. So in 2013, on the left-hand side, these numbers include Parks and Rec. On the projects, you'll see separated north and south with the totals of those projects. So those are projects that were completed in that year, and whether they happened north of the tracks or south of the tracks. And in 2013, we spent $179,000 on the north side. We spent $517,000 on the south side. I'll spare you. You can read the project descriptions. In 2014, we spent $374,000 on the north side and $415,000 on the south side. 2015, we split it almost perfectly. We had $550 on the north and $566 on the south. Here's where we start seeing some splits because of the shift from 8th Street to 1st Street and to Craft. In 2016, we spent $606 on the north side and $219 on the south. And then in 2017, when we include Parks and Rec, we spent $924,000 on the north side and $3.2 million on the south side. So then if we delete the Parks and Rec numbers, you'll see I've highlighted those cells where I've changed numbers or deleted numbers in pink. There's no change in 2013. Those numbers are identical to the other one. Same in 2014 and same in 2015. So in 2016, I removed the golf course pump and the golf course pump station construction from the north side. So that year you see a shift. We spent $406,000 on the north side, $219,000 on the south side. Then in 2017, if we take the multi-purpose facility and the Parks and Cemetery building out, we spent $924,000 on the north and $284,000 on the south. So then the next numbers are kind of a tabulation where we can look at things, and if we try to look, it's not really possible to look at a one-year time frame just because of the cost of the projects that we do. Mm-hmm. So if we look at the five-year program, including Parks and Rec, in the last 5 years, we spent $2.6 million on the north side. We spent $4.9 million on the south side. If we take the one right below it, if we exclude the Parks and Rec numbers, we spent $2.4 million on the north, and we spent $1.9 million on the south. So let me just put that into perspective for you, that with the cost of the projects that we do, that $500,000 discrepancy over 5 years is one street project. So I think that shows a very even split, and I think that shows a very strong consideration for all areas of the city.
So obviously this was something that came up during the candidate forum, Meet the Candidates, and it's something that we've received some questions on following that. We do plan on sending this as a packet of information to all candidates to make sure, just from a sense of fairness and transparency, that this information is being shared with everyone equally. And so we will be forwarding that as well.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Pat. Councilor Daniel?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say thank you. I know that you take great pride in the work that you do and how you do it and the way you pick projects, and I appreciate that. The gut feeling that I had for the answer is actually how it played out, and so I appreciate you doing this work, and I appreciate the work that you do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out because I honestly never considered that when I made my recommendations. So I was happy to see this as well.
Councilor Stefano?
Pat, on the improvements on the south and the north, in 2017, you have 4 million, $4 million for the south side. Is this including the water project, is that all county?
Is that
like the
no?
All the new buildings that have gone up over there on the water conservation building.
No, these are just city expenditures. These are just hard dollars out of our budget.
Okay.
So but they don't include. We've spent well over $500,000 at the wastewater plant. It's on the south side, but I didn't include that because I see that as a citywide improvement. Same with the water treatment plant. But I personally see the multipurpose facility as a huge benefit to the to the area.
That takes up most of the money. But anyway.
Well, no, not when you remove Parks and Rec from both sides. We're one street project different over 5 years.
Thank you.
And then the other thing that we forgot to mention is, clearly we're looking from 2013 to 2017, and from a streets perspective, we do have limited funds. And for as big of a project as First Street is, when you look at 2018, 2019, that is going to start looking more slanted than the previous 5 years have because of how big of a project that is and how limited our funds are. But it's the same thing if we were to decide to do State Street or something like that, or in those areas when we had 8th Street. So obviously as we move forward until First Street is done, that is going to slant things.
Councilor Griego.
Thank you, Pat, for the information you put together. But what I heard at meet the candidates, was something that we have, for years and years that I've been on council, have tried to fight, What goes on in Ward 4 and part of Ward 3, there's still a mindset on some people over there that we don't spend monies in those wards. And I don't like to use different directions, but Ward 4 and part of Ward 3, probably the track cut part of Ward 3, that's always been in people's minds over there. And I've always tried to tell them, those days are gone. What we try to do is, that's why I hate to even talk to you right now, use the other directions. But I see it myself, and when anybody tries to say that they're doing more here and there, I even take them and I show them what's going on. Because this is a whole city, and years ago, it was divided. This community was divided, and it's taken a lot of years to make it whole instead of divided, and that's something that eventually it'll go away, or maybe it won't. You'll still have a group of people there, no matter either in Ward 3 or 4 or Ward 1 and 2, that still has that mindset. So, and that's something that as councils change and staffs change, where they don't look at those boundaries, that's what we want. We don't want to ever go back to those situations. Some of those people were, it was a tough time back then.
Well, I think these numbers prove for the last 5 years, at least, there's been a very even split.
Sure.
And I think these numbers paint a picture.
Sure. I thank you very much.
Pat, thank you. Many times when we receive the capital improvement project list, we kind of look at them. But many times, council's pretty happy with what's going to happen or what will happen in the future, because we've got a 5-year plan for the most part. And most of the time we adhere to that because of the failing streets that are all over the city of Alamosa. And, many times a lot of folks forget that a lot of those capital improvement projects are basically sponsored by developers. And therein lies the conundrum for the folks that don't have a capital improvement project in place.
That's a very good point. A lot of people will drive through new subdivisions and see new streets with sidewalks and curb and gutter, and the city did not pay for those. So that's, you know, that's a good point.
And that's a misconception many times, and that just adds to the, you know, to the issue. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, sir. Pat, I would like to thank you for creating this document, because it's going to allow us to be transparent so everyone in the community could see exactly where the money is going. I think this spreadsheet is going to be an excellent tool for council's toolbox, so as we're going out talking to the public, we can actually dismiss any of those thoughts that we're spending more money on one side versus the other side. And the only way we could dismiss those thoughts is by having that solid information with us, and I believe this is going to help us out a lot. So thank you so very much.
You bet. And the city manager is exactly right. You know, the next few years will look skewed. There's no way to avoid it. But,
the only other improvement that I might make is you might just finesse that and look at the wards individually and see where that's a lot of work, I know.
It's a lot of work.
But the thing is that we expect our council to represent Ward 1, 2, 3, and 4, and in that, you know, it would be nice to know.
You know, I can do that if you'd like.
I think at that point, we would want 4 council members. I mean, because we wanted to be able to provide some grounded information for you to be able to have a discussion. From a staff time perspective, if we have 4 council members that want to see it dug into that as well, then we can do it. Some of those projects might potentially cross boundaries as well.
And it's one of the issues. This, like I said, this is a 30,000-foot view. This is a 2-day scan of probably 60 project folders. So I'm not going to say that these are to the penny. This should be very representative and very close. But as far as trying to look at each ward individually, I think it's probably irresponsible to try to split capital money evenly between 4 wards in the city, because you can't effectively, it would be impossible to effectively address the infrastructure issues in the city if you were concerned about how much money you were spending in each ward individually. It couldn't happen. You couldn't do it.
And the other part, I mean, if you look at First Street, do you want us to include that first section in 3 or in 2? Because First Street's the dividing line between the two there. And so you're going to run into some of those issues as well.
As was part of Richardson last year. You know, so it would be hard to do.
Yeah. It was just a thought I was having.
Well, I was there at first. I actually mapped each ward individually, and I started doing that, and I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be impossible. So in your defense, I had the same thought.
Sure. No, I mean, it was just something that, you know, I'm sure with your vast computers and all that stuff, you can figure out which project. But in all honesty, every project that is undertaken with a lot of forethought. And so, you know, that makes it justifiable. I have no problem with the way the projects are metered out for the most part. Councillor Hensley.
So, and it sounds like we've come to the conclusion not to do it by wards, but I was just going to say, I think doing the wards, like you say, all the different areas that would be broken up and how do you divide that? I can tell you as one who campaigned for Ward 1, sort of figuring out which side of the street I needed to campaign on and things like that definitely is a challenge. But also too, I think what you stated earlier is the idea of how you really didn't want to do the north and the south side, but we needed to do it for this project. It would, honestly, if we started looking at wards, it would just become more divisive than it would to solve anything. So I think you've done a great job, and it served its purpose, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Appreciate your time.
Pat, I think a lot of people visually don't see a lot of stuff going on in the south side, aside from the ice rink and stuff like that. As far as the streets are concerned, lighting and stuff like that, that's their biggest concern, why they don't see things like that going on.
There's a lot of streets and very little money. So we spent well over $200,000 on the south side this year with a plant mix seal coat. We covered 10th Street from 285 all the way to the city limits, South Craft, all of Railroad Avenue. You know, we did a lot of work on the south side this year. So there's a lot of streets, and if you don't travel around, the wards or the south side or the north side, it's hard to see unless it goes right past your house.
Thank you very much. You did a great job on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Heather?
That concludes staff update.
Thank you. We'll move on to council comment. Who has a council comment? Councilor Ty.
Yes, thank you, sir. Earlier, I didn't mention Eric's name as a part of the Unified Development Code. I believe Eric was a vital part of that team as well, and I want to make sure I acknowledge you, Eric, too, okay? And if I forgot anyone else, please forgive me. I apologize.
Councilor Daniel.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out to the cemetery building yesterday. It was a neat open house, getting to see the new offices for the park staff and the new building. It looks great. It's beautiful. It's going to be very nice, I think, for people to come in and get their needs met, as well as the staff offices. I was also able to see the old building, and so I liked it even more after I saw the old building. So that was great. I also had a really fun time this weekend. I ran in 2 zombie runs with a lot of volunteers and people pretending to be zombies and chasing me. But I was really impressed, and I got caught because I'm slow, but I was really impressed with, by the park, the trails that we have and how well maintained they are. And Jeff Owsley had set up the course for the Tukasa run, and it was just done very well, and it was easy to follow. And I appreciate knowing that our team makes it easy for them to do their stuff. And so that was it was a neat partnership. And holy cow, 4,000 potholes, so thank you. 4,087, I don't want to forget the last 87. Thank you for doing that, Pat, and your team. That's just amazing. And then just reminding everyone, if you haven't already voted by your ballots, to vote and get it turned in for next Tuesday, and have fun with that.
Very good. Thank you.
Mayor, I did forget a few things.
Absolutely,
they're just reminders of some upcoming events. On November 6th, we do have the ribbon cutting ceremony at 4 p.m. for the disc golf expansion and the archery range. And I think these are just critical to make sure people are aware of, because of the volunteer efforts, that without the volunteers, these 2 projects would not have happened. And so we want to make sure the public is aware of that ribbon cutting ceremony, as well as next week on November 8th at 6, we have a joint work session with the golf board, which I think will be a very important work session. The celebration of lights is November 17th, and then we had posted the Alamosa Christmas Light Parade as December 15th. They're still a little bit up in the air on that, so we'll make sure to keep that updated as they land on that. I think they're looking at trying to maybe expand it beyond just a parade, with some exciting ideas. And once they land on that, we'll let you know. But we do think it'll probably be either December 22nd or December 23rd.
Thank you, Heather. If there is no further council comment, I will adjourn this meeting. Meeting adjourned.